He stood in the middle of the bustling Christmas market, the smell of roasted chestnuts and pine assaulting his senses. The snowflakes had just started to fall, dusting the ground and the colourful storefronts with a pristine white. The scene was picture perfect, a holiday card come to life. In his hand, his phone felt impossibly heavy. He had just pressed the button, a final, unchangeable act that solidified his revenge. The money would hit his account in 3 days. He had done it. He had ruined Oswin's biggest deal. A text notification lit up the screen, and he flinched. It was Carla. The message was a simple picture, a newly installed park bench, a small brass plaque fixed to the back of it. The picture was clear, bright, and deeply innocent. A second text followed, a single emoji, a smiling face with a tear. The festive joy of the market around him suddenly felt like a cruel joke. He looked at the image, at the simple, quiet gesture. A wave of crushing guilt hit him, so powerful it made him stumble against a food stand. He had come here to feel a triumph, a final act of justice for the years of neglect. But all he felt was an overwhelming, soul-deep ache. He stared at the picture, the world around him blurring into a confused mess of light and sound. It all started the year Dad died. I was 10, Oswin was 12. The world was a sudden, confusing canvas of funeral black and hushed whispers. Dad's beat-up pickup truck was a crumpled piece of metal on the evening news. The hospital bills, the mortgage on our small house, the overwhelming paperwork, it was too much for Maribel, our mother, to handle alone. That's when Oswin's father, a man I barely knew, stepped in. He had left Oswin a small trust fund of shares in a nascent tech company. Oswin, without a second thought, signed the papers and directed the funds to us. It wasn't a huge amount, just enough to keep us from drowning. He was just a kid, but in that moment, he became my big brother, my protector, the one who held us together when we were falling apart. I never forgot that sacrifice, that quiet, steady act of love that saved my family. He was the one thing that kept the ache of my father's absence from becoming a gaping wound. A few years later, the tide began to turn, slowly at first, then with a crushing speed that left me in the dust. The tech company Oswin had invested in went from a small, whispered-about startup to a major player. His shares, which had been just enough to keep us afloat, became a small fortune. He dropped out of college to manage his portfolio, and soon he was the youngest, sharpest mind in the room. He bought a sprawling house in the hills, a sleek, black car, and a life I couldn't even fathom. Meanwhile, I was working at a gas station, my hands smelling of stale coffee and gasoline, watching my dreams of a college education evaporate. It felt like an invisible wall was growing between us, made of expensive suits and private jets, while I was stuck on the other side, watching the life I might have had through a smudged window. The gratitude I had felt for him began to curdle into a bitter, resentful jealousy. Every year our family's Christmas tradition was the same. We would drive an hour north to a sprawling tree farm. Oswin, Maribel, and I would spend hours walking through the rows of Fraser firs, searching for the perfect one. It was a ritual, a sacred pilgrimage. It was the one thing that hadn't changed since Dad died. It was a day where we were just family, not the son who failed and the cousin who succeeded. But this year the tradition felt different. Oswin kept checking his phone, his face bathed in the cold, blue light of a new text notification. He was distracted, half there. I kept trying to get his attention, to talk about a memory or a stupid joke from when we were kids, but he would just nod absently, his eyes on the screen. It felt like I was trying to hold on to smoke, and the more I tried, the faster it slipped through my fingers. The biggest shift came with Carla. She was an architect, all sharp angles and confident smiles, a perfect fit for Oswin's new world. When he introduced her to the family, she was kind, but she had a way of looking at me that made me feel like an interesting but ultimately unimportant footnote in their story. She and Oswin would talk for hours about their new home, their travel plans, their future, and I would sit there, a silent spectator, watching the two people I loved most in the world build a life that had no room for me. It was a slow, painful process of being replaced, of being phased out like an outdated piece of furniture. Carla and Oswin were a unit, a perfect circle, and I was the one standing outside of it, watching the light from their happiness spill onto the cold ground. A few weeks before the tree farm trip, We were all at a dinner at Oswin's new house. The house was enormous, all glass and stone, a testament to his success. The conversation drifted to his business deals, and he casually mentioned a massive new project. "It's a big risk," he said, laughing. "But the shares are going to make us a fortune." He said us, but he was looking at Carla, a silent confirmation that their world was one of two. The word hit me like a physical blow. It was an accidental reminder of everything I wasn't. I felt small, insignificant, and forgotten. The dinner that night tasted like dust and disappointment. I nodded and smiled and pretended to be happy for him, but inside a bitter seed of resentment took root. That night, my mother, Maribel, sat me down. She had seen the look on my face. "Jareth," she said, her voice soft but firm, "I know you're struggling, but you need to be happy for him. Look at everything he's done for us. He's a good man." Her words, meant to comfort me, only made the feeling of failure worse. She was right. I should be happy for him. I knew that. But my heart ached with a deep, silent shame. "I know," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I'm trying," but I wasn't. I was looking for a reason to be angry, a way to justify the bitter taste in my mouth. I wanted to be seen for my own worth, not just as the poor cousin who was saved by Oswin's grace. The final insult came a few days later, on the phone with Oswin. I was talking about the trip to the tree farm, excited to get back to our old tradition. "I'm thinking of taking a few days off to drive up," I said, a hopeful lilt in my voice. "Yeah, I don't know, man," he said, his voice flat. "It's a long drive, and we weren't really expecting you for Christmas." The words were a casual, dismissive afterthought, but they felt like a knife twisting in my gut. I told myself it was a joke, a misunderstanding, but the silence that followed told me otherwise. The quiet, unspoken truth was this: I didn't belong in his new life. I was an afterthought, a piece of his old life that he no longer had a use for. I hung up the phone and stared at the dark screen. I walked to the window, the night air cold against the glass. The words replayed in my mind: "We weren't really expecting you for Christmas." They felt like a final goodbye, an emotional eviction notice. I thought of all the years I had spent living in his shadow, of the silent sacrifices I had made, the dreams I had let die. The gratitude I had felt for him for so long had been a leash, and now it was choking me. I sat down at my laptop and typed his name into a search bar. I found his company website, his public portfolio, and his recent investments. I was looking for a way to hurt him, a way to make him feel the same way I did, forgotten and insignificant. I kept digging, clicking on one obscure financial news site after another, searching for something, anything. My search led me to an article about a small, privately owned company that had just gone public. It was a new player in the tech sector, and Oswin was a major investor. The company was called Apex Innovations. I read about the founder, a guy named Boone, who had a reputation for cutting corners. I also found an article from a small-town newspaper about a legal dispute over Apex's intellectual property, a case that had been buried and forgotten. The article mentioned a friend of mine, a guy named Cassidy, who worked as a financial analyst for an obscure firm that specialized in market law. I remembered him talking about a specific type of market vulnerability, a legal loophole. A cold, hard plan began to form in my mind. The betrayal I felt had turned into a burning fire of retribution. I picked up the phone, my hands shaking. My mind was a hurricane. The words "we weren't really expecting you" echoed in my skull, each syllable a new stab of pain. I told myself this wasn't about the money, it was about everything that had built up over the years: the gas station job, the failed dreams, the feeling of being an accessory in Oswin's perfect life. He had saved us, sure, but he had also hung it over my head, not with his words, but with his success. He had grown so much bigger than the family he once saved, so important that he forgot about the small people who had once relied on him. This was about making him see me. It was about making him feel what I felt, if only for a moment. This was about him finally understanding the quiet desperation that had been my constant companion for the past few years. This was about a justice that felt long overdue. I drove out to Cassidy's small apartment. It was a cluttered mess of legal documents and half-eaten takeout containers. He was surprised to see me, but he listened as I laid out my plan. He frowned. "Jareth, man, this is deep. This isn't just about a few shares. You could bring the whole thing down." This is market manipulation. It's serious. He was a man of logic and numbers, and he didn't understand the emotional current that was carrying me forward. I told him I didn't care. I needed to know if it was possible. He hesitated for a long time, his brow furrowed. Then he pulled up a file on his computer. He showed me the legal precedent, the specific, little-known rule that allowed a competitor to challenge a company's intellectual property based on a forgotten, private patent. He explained the domino effect it would have on the stock price. He said it would financially cripple the company. That night, my phone buzzed with a text from Carla. "Hey Jareth, thinking about doing a big Christmas dinner. What do you want to bring? Hope to see you here." The text was innocent and kind, a complete contrast to Oswin's nonchalant dismissal. She didn't know. She didn't know that his perfect life was about to implode. She didn't know what he had said to me. The text felt like a slap in the face. It was another reminder of how easily I had been forgotten. The rage that had been a slow burn flared into a wild fire. I typed a brief response, a lie. "Sounds great. I can bring some wine," and then I deleted the text and didn't respond. The fury was a shield that protected me from the pain. It was easier to be angry than to feel the sting of his careless words. I got home and found my mother in the living room, surrounded by dusty old photo albums. Her eyes were red, but she was smiling. "Look," she said, pointing to a picture of me, my father, and a young Oswin in front of a Christmas tree. "Your father loved Christmas. It was his favorite time of year. He always said the only thing that matters is family, and Oswin, he's always been family." She looked at me, a silent plea in her eyes. I felt a pang of guilt, a cold, sharp feeling that broke through the wall of my rage. I sat down and looked at the pictures, remembering the man my father was, the boy Oswin was, and how they had once been two sides of the same coin. The albums felt like a ghost, a silent accusation. My resolve began to weaken, the righteousness of my revenge feeling less and less certain. The next day, my younger sister Fern called me. She was in her first year of college, and she was struggling. "I'm thinking of dropping out, Jareth," she said, her voice filled with a familiar weariness. "I just can't keep up with the tuition. It's too much." My heart ached for her. "Wait," I said. "What about the tuition money Oswin was supposed to give you?" There was a long silence. "What are you talking about?" she said. "He hasn't given me anything." I felt a knot of confusion in my stomach. I remembered Oswin telling me, years ago, that he was saving money to put Fern through school. He had never mentioned it to her. He had been quietly, secretly helping us from the start. That night, I sat in front of my computer, the screen burning in the darkness of my room. The link was open. The market was about to close. The fire of retribution still burned, but it was now laced with a cold sense of dread. I was at a crossroads. I could let the fire consume me, or I could choose a different path. But what was the point? Oswin had forgotten me. He was a different person now, living in a different world. He didn't need me. This was my last chance to make him see me. I logged into the market, my fingers trembling as I navigated to the obscure legal loophole Cassidy had shown me. I thought of my father, of Oswin, and of the family we used to be. The decision was made. The phone rang. It was Lowell, a childhood friend who worked on Wall Street. He had heard about the legal loophole and its potential impact. He warned me that if I went through with it, I would be destroying more than just Oswin's company. I would be destroying his life. I dismissed his warning, telling myself it was too late to turn back. I had come this far. I had to see it through. He hung up, and the silence in the room felt heavy and accusing. I stared at the screen, my finger hovering over the button. The clock ticked down, the seconds stretching into an eternity. I felt a surge of adrenaline, a rush of power. I was about to do something irreversible, something that would change everything. With a deep breath, I pressed the button. The screen flashed a confirmation message, a sterile, impersonal confirmation of a deeply personal act of betrayal. My hand still trembled, but a cold, hard sense of finality settled over me. There was no going back now. My phone rang immediately, the number flashing up as Oswin. He was calling me. I felt a sick, twisted thrill. He knew. I answered, but the call dropped. I tried to call back, but it went straight to his voicemail. I felt a moment of panic. This wasn't what I had planned. I wanted a confrontation, a confession, a fight. I wanted him to hear my pain. I wanted him to know what he had done. But the phone was silent. I was left alone with my thoughts. The phone buzzed with an incoming text message. It wasn't Oswin. The number was unrecognizable. I opened it, my heart pounding in my chest. It was a screenshot of a medical chart. At the top, in bold, black letters, was Oswin's name. Below, a series of codes and dates. I couldn't make out the details, but a single line of text caught my eye, a sentence that stopped my heart. It read, "Prognosis poor. Immediate aggressive treatment required." The world tilted. The fire of my rage suddenly felt like a meaningless, pathetic flicker in the face of an enormous, devastating truth. I tried to call the number back. It went to a dead line. I was in a state of shock, the screen in my hand, a terrible, cold testament to a reality I couldn't comprehend. The revenge, the anger, the years of pain, it all felt small and meaningless. The air was knocked out of me. It was all a mistake, a devastating, irreversible mistake. I sat on the floor, my mind reeling. I had been so consumed by my own suffering that I hadn't seen the suffering of the one person I thought I knew better than anyone. It all came crashing down, his distraction, the constant phone calls, the way he had been so busy. It wasn't about him being successful, it was about him trying to hold his life together while it fell apart. My phone rang again. It was Carla. Her voice was thin, reedy, filled with a raw panic. "Jareth," she said. "He's sick. He's been sick for months. He didn't want anyone to know. He said he didn't want to be a burden on anyone, especially you." The words hit me like a series of body blows. He had been trying to protect me. His words, "We weren't expecting you for Christmas," were not an act of dismissal, but an act of love, a desperate, clumsy attempt to shield me from the truth. He wanted me to stay away, to live my life without the weight of his illness on my shoulders. I felt a wave of nausea. I had been so wrong, so terribly, completely wrong. My jealousy had blinded me to the truth, and in my blind rage, I had done something unforgivable. I booked the first flight I could find, a red-eye that left in 2 hours. On the plane, I stared out the window, the world a blur of dark fields and city lights. I looked at the medical chart Carla had sent me. The prognosis was worse than I had initially thought. It was a rare form of cancer, and it was moving fast. All the signs were there, if I had only bothered to look. His gaunt face, the way he was always tired, the way he was constantly on his phone, talking to doctors and lawyers. He had been fighting a battle I hadn't even known about, and in my ignorance, I had tried to sabotage the very thing that was meant to be his legacy, his one last act of love. I arrived at the hospital early the next morning. It was a sterile, impersonal place, a stark contrast to the festive Christmas market I had been in just hours before. I saw him in the hallway talking on the phone with a doctor. He looked pale and tired, his frame thinner than I remembered. He was asking about a market fluctuation, his voice strained and tired. My heart shattered into a million pieces. He was still worried about the shares, the money, the business, even while his body was betraying him. I walked up to him, my feet heavy. The words felt like lead in my mouth, but I had to say them. "Oswin," I said, my voice barely a whisper, "I have to tell you something." I confessed everything, the whole sordid story, my jealousy, my anger, the call to Cassidy, the button I had pressed. He listened, his face a mask of disbelief and then a slow, dawning sadness. He didn't yell or scream. He just looked at me with a profound sadness. "Jareth," he said, his voice cracking, "I'm sorry. I should have told you. I was trying to protect you. I didn't want you to have to go through this." My tears began to fall. "I'm so sorry, Oswin," I said. "I thought you had forgotten me." He put a hand on my shoulder. "Never," he said, "never." Then, he told me the truth, the one I had been so desperate to find. The shares weren't for him. They were for a trust fund, a quiet, unannounced gift to put my sister Fern through school. He had been planning it for years, a way to pay back the family that had been his only refuge. We sat in the hospital waiting room for hours, talking about everything and nothing. I confessed my fears, the feeling of being left behind, and the shame I had carried. He confessed his own fears, his own worries, and the loneliness of his secret. He told me that the Christmas tree hunting tradition wasn't just a ritual for him, it was a way of connecting with the past, of feeling the last warmth of a family that was gone. He said he had been planning to put a plaque on a park bench that year, in memory of my father, a public acknowledgement of the man who had given him a family. He said he had been waiting to tell me about it on Christmas Day, a small gift for me. The next day, Jareth and Oswin went to the Christmas market, back to the same park bench where it all began. Jareth had rebought the shares for Fern's trust, sacrificing his own savings to do so. It was a quiet, unannounced act of love, a sacrifice that felt right. They sat on the bench in silence, the bustling market around them a distant hum. Oswin pointed to the plaque. It read, "In loving memory of a father and brother who taught us the meaning of family. Jareth placed his hand on Oswin's shoulder. He felt a profound sense of peace. The tears he cried then were not of anger or regret, but of love and healing. The world had come full circle, and he had finally found his own kind of redemption,